We're in the midst of the 20th annual Wild and Scenic Film Festival. This is sponsored as ever by Circle, and you can find the festival at wildandscenicfilmfestival.org, no spaces, and Circle at syrcl.org. I'm Chuck Jaffe. Over the years, I've been involved with the selection committee. I've been on the awards jury for many years and written dozens of reviews for the local newspaper, The Union. Here and now, we have the pleasure of speaking with one of the filmmakers, Suzanne Crocker. She wrote and directed. She's a key player in the documentary First We Eat. And you can find that at the virtual festival session called Reliant on Our Environment, #1. It is our pleasure. Welcome, Suzanne Crocker. How are you enjoying being part of the Wild and Scenic Film Festival?
Hi, Chuck. Well, it's a pleasure to be back at Wild Scenic again. As you know, I was there in 2015 with the previous film, All the Time in the World, with my youngest in tow at that time, and we had an amazing experience. So it's great to be back at Wild and Scenic again. I wish, of course, I was there in person once again, as we all do, but understanding the circumstances surrounding the last month, it's great that it could pivot to be virtual. So I'm really thrilled to be able to have this conversation with you and still share it with the audience, even all the way from Dawson City in the Yukon, way up here next to Alaska.
So here you are in northern Canada in January. How's the weather?
Well, we just got through a cold snap. 2 days ago, it was -50 Celsius.
-50.
That's -58 Fahrenheit, I believe. That's without any wind chill. And we had a run of that for about a week. And so we're very happy to be on the other side of that. And I'm hoping in a few days it's going to be warm enough to get my cross-country skis on again. But it's definitely a winter wonderland up here.
So you referred to the film in 2015 that you graced us with, All the Time in the World. We're also going to show that at this festival. That's going to be part of this 20-year retrospective that we're going to do. You can find All the Time in the World at the virtual festival session called 20 Years of WSFF Adventure. Now, before we move on, I have to say that All the Time in the World is one of my favorite films in 20 years of avid festival watching. First We Eat, the new film, and All the Time in the World are extreme family adventures. And I'm just going to pick on one thing to get us started. And that's maybe you could describe what it means to involve your kids now and back when they were considerably younger in these two films.
Well, when they were considerably younger in All the Time in the World, they were 10, 8, and 4 turning 5. It was very easy to involve them in the filmmaking process because they just didn't really have a sense of what that was versus normal life, and so they carried on as per usual. I believe, at least I was told by my kids at the end of that whole filmmaking experience, once the film was out in the world, that I had promised them I would never film them again. I definitely broke that promise. I don't remember making that promise, so I guess I can't break it if I don't remember making it. But you know, they are definitely the stars of the films, and they definitely make the films. And even in this new film, you know, when they were teenagers, of course, as teenagers, they are more solid, I would say, in their independent opinions. In both films, they're not afraid to say what they think, but you can imagine what a teenager thinks versus what a 10-year-old thinks sometimes. And in both cases, they don't change their behavior if the camera's there or not, for which I'm really grateful, because I think that's what allows the capture of real, authentic family moments. So without the kids, there would definitely be not entertaining films. They're definitely a key part of both.
So picking up on how you're talking about them, in the first film, they were pretty much angels. And here we come 7 years later to First We Eat. And what should I say? They did a certain amount of complaining. They were pretty clever about it. And I'll also add that they had a pretty sturdy commitment to this huge challenge you put before them. Maybe you could talk about the complaining and the cleverness and the commitment.
Yes, well, like for those who don't already know, in First We Eat, I decided to take every bit of grocery store food out of our house for a year. Like that meant everything. And only feed my family food that could be foraged, hunted, gathered, fished, grown, raised around Dawson City in the Yukon, which is only 300 kilometers south of the Arctic Circle, right next to Alaska, as I mentioned. So not what you think about as the breadbasket of Canada, for sure. So for 3 teenagers, they were 17, 15, and 12 going on 12, I believe, during the filming. And to tell your teenagers that all their grab and go food, their snack food, everything basically they're familiar with is going to disappear for a year. They were not at all thrilled about this. And when I asked them, the fall before starting this project, if they would be willing to go along with this, they all flatly refused, which I guess is not surprising, given that option. I did manage to cajole them into going along with it. I think only because eventually my husband also flatly refused. They were, like, Mom, you can do whatever you want, but this is crazy. Don't expect us to be involved. And somehow eventually my husband started to see the intrigue in it. And so he agreed to start off anyway with no commitment that he would, be able to do it all the way through. And when he got on board, that meant the 2 people who do the grocery shopping, me and my husband, were not going to be grocery shopping anymore. So that's, I think, when the kids thought, okay, well, we don't want to do the grocery shopping, so I guess we're going to have to go along with that. And I also thought, I thought that my kids would actually be more excited about having me change to the kitchen 24/7 for a year, because I was not a cook. I wouldn't say I'm naturally a domestic person in those, what we consider the domestic chores. And the kitchen was really not where I liked to be. So I used to get complaints from my kids all the time, like, Mom, we can't just live on bagels and peanut butter alone. Like, you need to be making us real meals. So I thought, here I was going to be devoting myself to making them real meals for a year. They would be over the moon. They didn't seem to have that reaction at first. So I didn't win them over that way. I think it was more, the path of least resistance when the grocery shoppers decided they weren't going to grocery shop anymore. They're like, all right, here we go. We're in for it now.
So there's so much in your answer. Let's stick with the kids for a second. In the film, you say, I wonder if I'm torturing my children. Were you torturing your children?
Well, there were certainly times where I was made to feel that way. And it was, I think this is kind of something that all parents juggle with at one time or another. We try and make decisions based on what we think is best for our family and for our kids. They're not always the decisions our kids want to hear, whether that's like limiting screen time or, whatever it might be. And so there's often pushback, and often I think as parents we have to question, do our decisions really make sense in the long run, especially when it seems to be causing angst in our kids in the short term. So this was sort of, I guess, a situation of that, maybe in spades, because of the sort of the gravity of the situation. So yeah, it was in my mind, of course. Like, I wanted them to be happy, of course. I didn't want them to be miserable for a year. And yet the reasons I was doing this, I felt were really important, and for us to see if it could be done still, in this day and age. And so there was always this kind of balancing. But so fundamentally, I thought it was the right thing to try. I thought in the end it would be good, but I did also want them to be happy.
So somewhere in the middle between the complaining and the commitment, at least what we see on the screen, is a lot of cleverness and a lot of awareness about what it is they were actually going through. Were you surprised by this kind of commentary, or is this the brand of your kids?
Well, during the film, there's moments when each person in the family is speaking directly to the camera. And those were moments we called the confessionals. So I would set up the camera in a private place and I would disappear. So it would just be them and the camera. And they were allowed to say whatever was on their mind at that moment. And I promised that I wouldn't look at that footage or listen to what they said until the year was over.
Oh.
And I kept that promise. So they felt free to, say whatever was on their mind, and you get some bits of that throughout the film. What I was most surprised about at the end of the year when I went through the footage was how much understanding and appreciation they had for some of the things that were going on, because that wasn't always apparent to me as mom in real time. So I realized when I went through that footage at the end that despite, the complaining, they were really appreciating how much effort goes into the food that we need to keep us alive, not only, in the household, but beyond that, from the production of the food, from the farmers, from the land, everything. So, and I did think it was important with this experiment to keep it real. I mean, that's kind of my style. I get an idea I want to do. I'm going to do it regardless if I'm going to film it or not. And I decide to film it in order to share it with the world. But I'm going to film what actually happens, the good, the bad, and the weird. And so, yeah, it was important to me to just let it roll out as it was going to roll out. I had no idea, how it would roll out, but that's what I captured.
So there's a tendency to highlight the kids, but this husband of yours, tell me something about him putting up with this experiment that's your brainchild, and how he took to it and was involved in it all.
Yes, well, as I mentioned, he also refused to be involved at first. Gerard tends to think that I have a predisposition to what he calls austerity, and I feel I have a predisposition to what I call sustainability. So it's interesting, those two perspectives. But, you know, I was amazed. Well, I was thrilled that he agreed eventually to go along with it. That was great, because it would have been, you know, a totally different experience and really difficult if there was one person in the family trying to do this. Well, everybody around me was eating normally. And it also wouldn't have been the experiment I was looking for, you know. It's like, can you do this as a family of 5 people who don't necessarily have a ton of expertise and to begin with, at least from my perspective. So I was thrilled when he agreed. And I was shocked, actually, that he went through the year and he didn't cheat. And I think that's quite amazing because, you know, he had, of course, many opportunities to cheat. He leaves the house and does whatever he wants. You know, he goes and plays old timer hockey, and in the locker room afterwards, there's often a few beer. And he, you know, didn't have, for example, he didn't have any alcohol for that entire year, which I just thought was amazing that he did that. And, you know, he is also pretty essential in the provider point of view. Like our main meat was moose, which Gerard hunted. In this case, you know, Murphy's Law, it was the most difficult moose hunt ever in order to get a moose when we were really depending on it. But yeah, so he was bringing home the moose, which was major. He was bringing home the burbot, ice fishing for burbot, which also provided a really important part of our diet. And that was something he'd never done before, was ice fishing. So that was something new. And he also, we had in our household, we have the routine that we each take turns cooking supper. And so we continued to do that. He just had a whole different array of ingredients that he had to cook with. So, but he also, as you know, in both films, he's a risk taker. He has a lot of spontaneous humor. He's a Newfoundlander from the East Coast. Newfoundlanders are renowned for their sense of humor, and Gerard is no exception. And he, yeah, is spontaneously funny and silly and all those things. So that provides a lot of comic relief, I would say, throughout the film.
So you said you were living in Dawson City, way up north in the Yukon. You know, I guess this came to you, if I'm not wrong, there was a landslide, and you put it together with the notion that like 97% of your food comes from somewhere else, like 1,000 or more miles away. Do you think this experiment of yours could work like for all of Dawson City, or was it just particular to you?
That was definitely part of my thinking was, you know, if we could do it, could it be extrapolated to the entire community if we needed to or chose to do that? And I had lots of discussions with our local farmers, with our conservation officers afterwards to talk about that based on all the things I learned during that year. And the bottom line is, I think that it could. It would be difficult, of course, if it happened, you know, just like that. But if it was a gradual process, the farmers feel that enough cultivated food could be produced. The conservation officers feel that if it was our community hunting, fishing, trapping in our region, that it was sustainable for the wildlife. If we were all making use of wild meat, it would mean, you know, it would mean eating less. It would mean getting used to not always having to fill our bellies to the stuffed point, which is not necessarily a bad thing to contemplate at all. It would mean using all parts of the animal harvested, which was something that we did during that year. But there's an awful lot of nutrition in when you harvest an animal beyond the roasts, the steaks, and the burger that we tend when we grocery store shop to not have any knowledge of all the other parts of the animal, but there's an awful lot of nutrition. And so the harvest of an animal can go a really long way if you're making use of all parts of the animal, you know, the organ meats, the blood, the intestines, the bone marrow, the brain, the nose, everything. So it would mean paying more attention to that. It would mean not wasting any food. I mean, we waste an incredible amount of food, much of it unintentionally, but you know, in all places, from the production right up to the point where we ignore it in our fridge or our freezer, or we buy too much. So it would mean not wasting a drop of anything. And we certainly found that during the year, you know, like the byproduct of making cheese is whey. And the whey we would use to tenderize meat, or as a stock for soup, or even something as simple as boiling potatoes. Like that potato water didn't go down the drain. That was repurposed into soup stock or something else. So I think, you know, there were so many lessons learned during that year, but one of them was just, you begin to appreciate every single morsel because you know where it came from, you know, the work that went into it being on your plate. And so you don't want to waste anything.
And
so
yeah, you're gonna rush again to have for dinner moose nostrils.
Well, moose nose is an acquired taste. It's a delicacy. Dawson City's on the territory of the Tronda-Quichin, which is the First Nation people who have been here for thousands and thousands of years. And so grateful to live in they're self-governing people. And I'm so grateful to live in a part of the world where the First Nation is self-governing. It's an amazing community, and despite, you know, the atrocities that have been done over the years by the Canadian government and residential school systems, and trying to and colonization in general, some of that traditional knowledge has been maintained and is cultivated and is passed on to youth, and there's great value in that knowledge, both from the Indigenous people and from really, you know, all the people in our community, especially those who lived, who are older and lived in a different time when things were done differently. There's so much knowledge in all our communities, I believe. But back to the moose nose. So moose nose is a delicacy amongst the Indigenous elders here of the Tronda-Quichin, but it is very much an acquired taste, and I have yet to. I keep trying, but I have yet to acquire it. So when we get a moose have gotten a moose in subsequent years, we give our moose nose to Victor Henry, who you meet in the film, and he is quite happy to have it, and we're quite happy to gift it to him. Let me just say that.
So you're referring to the native people. I think in Canada they're called the First People.
First Nation.
First Nation. And so say something about, it's not just that they set this example and the spirit, they provided a lot of your food. What do you have to say about the relation that you and your family had with these people?
Yeah, well, you know, in Dawson in general, we all live well together. It's a very reciprocal relationship, and the Tronda-Quichin have a long history of generosity. When settlers first came to this area, you know, which most people will think of as the time of the gold rush, and but even before that, when settlers came here, the Tronda-Quichin knew that they didn't have the skills or the knowledge to survive, and were really generous in their teachings and in giving the settlers meat and whatnot. And that has continued that tradition of generosity has continued to this day. The Trandakwakin put on community feasts for which the entire community is invited. The Han language, which is the traditional language, is taught in our school. There are what are called culture camps for youth that are open to all the youth in our community. So that is First Fish, which we see a bit of in the film. Also First Hunt, which is caribou hunting in the fall at the Dempster Highway. Fall harvest camp, dry meat camp, tan hiding camp. All these are open to the entire community, and the Indigenous way of being and doing and philosophies of living are taught in our school and are shared with our community. So it's yeah, the Trandakwakin are the integral part of our community, and those of us who came later are really grateful to have been welcomed into this community and onto this land. So for the film and this year of eating local, I've been told afterwards by some of the Trandakwakin elders that they thought I was a bit crazy in what I was embarking on, but when they realized I was serious about it, it was like, okay, well, we're going to help. And so and I was also, invited to be at these culture camps and allowed to film at them, which was wonderful to be able to capture, these aspects of the richness of our community and share them with the rest of the world in the film.
So you talk about food, of course, that's central to the film. Meat in particular, the protein of meat. Now, you are not even a meat person generally. What would you have to say about how this affected your sensibilities with meat being so important?
Yes, well, I was a vegetarian until I married a moose hunter who liked to cook. And since I didn't like to cook, then it was like, okay, you like to cook, I'll eat whatever you cook, which tended to be meat. But so I gave up my vegetarianism, but I really have never enjoyed handling meat or cooking meat myself. And one of the things that quickly became apparent when I embarked on this year of eating 100% local is that we just cannot produce any protein source that's not animal based. We just don't have a growing season to support that. Some of our very best farmers on our very best ground can grow a few chickpeas, for example, but you get 2 cups out of a harvest, like just not enough to be a protein source of any significance. So I quickly had to learn to become comfortable handling meat. 1 second, I'm going to get some water. And at first it was difficult, but I think as I spent a lot of time with the farmers, I spent a lot of time on their farms, and so I was around the animals from their birth to their harvest, and witnessed, the good life they lived in between, and the care that was given to them by the farmers, and how valued they were by the farmers and respected. And I, somehow in all of that, I just came to see meat a bit differently. Like I had a great reverence for it and for the sacrifice of the life that was feeding me. And even being, I didn't know if I could be there at harvest time, but I felt it was important that I was. It was important, like if, when you buy a breast of chicken in the grocery store on a styrofoam pack covered in cellophane, it's really a long way from the chicken or the baby chick, and similar with beef from the cow, or pork or bacon from the pig. And I thought it was really important for me to be there at all stages to understand the process and the life and everything that goes into putting that chicken breast on my plate. And I just have such a respect and reverence, I guess, and gratitude for the animals and for the farmers that feed me, that I just developed a different relationship with meat. And also recognizing that if I was going to not eat meat, that meant that my protein sources would have to travel thousands and thousands of miles to get to me. They would be, I wouldn't know how they were grown. I wouldn't know the amount of pesticide that went into it. I wouldn't know if the soya field was a monoculture that was, devastating other things around it. I would have no connection with that. And so now it makes, now I'm a diehard locavore. And now it makes way more sense to me to eat what my geography can produce than to eat things that come from far, far away. And I don't know how they're produced, what goes into the labor, I just don't know. And so it's much better to know and for me. So that's kind of where I ended up on that issue.
So whatever all your diet really amounted to, big topics in the film are sugar and salt, maybe flour. Talk about how torqued out you were dealing with these, what should I say, accoutrements of any diet.
Yeah, that's another thing. When I started this experiment, I thought, okay, meat, yeah, we've got that covered. Potatoes, berries, I can survive on meat, potatoes, and berries, so we're going to be okay. But what I kind of forgot about were what we think of the staples in our pantry, like the baking powder and the yeast and the cinnamon and the flour and the sugar and the oil and the vinegar, they're just like in the background, but always there. And when you take those away, you realize oh, okay, no pasta, no rice, no oil, no vinegar. How are you gonna, no crystallized sugar, no white flour. And so there was, a combination of learning to live without those things, which was interesting. And also trying to think of, okay, well, how would you, if I want to try and make some kind of something that needs leavening, what will I do? And so there was also this creativity trying to find substitutions, like the discovery that rhubarb juice is basically as acidic as white vinegar. And so being able to use that in place of vinegar, for example. But yes, grains are very difficult to grow here, again, because of our short growing season. Otto, who we meet in the film, one of the farmers, is able to grow some grain. And that year it was mostly rye because all the barley got eaten by moose, and wheat is very hard to grow. So we had this very tiny amount of wheat to grind into flour and a lot of rye. And if anybody is a baker, they'll understand that baking with 100% rye is very challenging. There's very challenging as well. Just leave it at that. And so yeah, you learn to do other things. So sweetness, of course. I've got 3 teenagers and sweet things are part of their mainstay. So that became a bit of a challenge. And then, times like Halloween or Christmas or Valentine's Day, what can I offer as a sweet alternative? So birch syrup, that became our main sweetener. We don't have any maple trees here, but we do have birch trees. And although it takes double the sap to make a liter of birch syrup as it does for maple syrup, it can be done, and it's really quite delicious. So that became the main sweetener. We had one gold miner, who started to raise honeybees. And he is the first person that I know who is able to overwinter bees in this cold climate successfully. So then a bit of honey got added to our menu. And then I also experimented with non-GMO sugar beets. A few of our farmers agreed to plant them and they grew super well. And it's because I thought that would be a way to make crystallized sugar, because if you're baking, like sometimes you just need crystallized sugar to make things work. Like try making a cookie with birch syrup. But it's possible, but it's an incredibly tedious process to get sugar out of sugar beets. So, there were all these sort of side channels that became thread points, I guess, in the film, trying to figure out what would be the sweetener. And then, of course, the salt is the most unusual one of all. Salt, I knew from the get-go that we didn't need added salt from a nutritional point of view, because we were eating meat, and there's enough sodium and chloride in meat to meet our salt needs. And I double checked that to prove it to people by checking my blood every 3 months during the year, which isn't in the film. And sure enough, my sodium and chloride were totally fine. So that wasn't an issue. It was certainly an issue early on for flavor and taste. Everything tasted really bland at first, but then my taste buds just kind of came alive and I started to taste the flavors of the food without the salt. So then I didn't need it for that anymore. But salt is really important from a preservation point of view. Over history, salt has been currency. Wars have been fought over salt, and most of that is because of preservation of food. So I still wondered, how could we, in this place, we're far from the sea, find any kind of salt if we had to for preservation? And that led me down this challenge of going to unusual methods to try and get salt, which becomes another thread point in the film.
Yeah, I think that'll be one of the fun experiences in watching the film, that this relationship to salt. I mean, we could talk about these all kinds of foods, but one other thing, you made reference to no alcohol. It was also no caffeine. And I could ask you what this felt like to accomplish, but maybe the backdrop question is, you say that you had a healthy year, that this was healthy for you to go through this year of First We Eat. And I'm wondering if you've stuck to some of these lessons.
Yes, I have. We're now 3 years since the experiment stopped, and I have not gone back to caffeine. And what I discovered about caffeine is that besides it being my comfort food, I definitely used to use it as a crutch, as a drug. And I would stay up later than I should in the evening to get things done, because I knew the next day I could get by with my beloved cup of strong tea in the morning and in the afternoon, or for other folks, it would be coffee. And when I took that away, because I had to, because there's no caffeine source that can be produced here, at first I actually had to have afternoon naps, which was very weird. And then eventually I just learned that when I'm tired in the evening, that means I need to sleep. So go to sleep, because that's the only way you're going to get through the day the next day. So that kind of became routine, is I guess more listening to my body. And so now when I'm tired, I don't stay up and try and get a million things done. I go to bed. And as a result, I have more energy than I did when I was using caffeine. And that's just simply because I feel anyway, because I sleep as much as my body needs to. So it was a bit of an ordeal getting off caffeine. And I thought, hey, I made it through a year. I feel great. I'm not going to go back on, because that's going to be a slippery slope, just right back to where I was. So I've remained off caffeine. Although I will say one thing that has come back into my life is chocolate. So I suppose I do get a tiny hit of caffeine from chocolate.
Okay. Now, and chocolate is not what you'd call local, or am I wrong?
Oh yeah, no, chocolate is an indulgence that has come back in. Yeah. So, on that question of um, I continue to, I would say I eat 90% local still. And my family probably 75% local. So every fall, we still have 5 freezers stocked with food and a pantry of food that I've canned. And every fall I'm putting away enough food for the year. So all of our meat, all of our vegetables, all our berries, all our dairy, all our eggs are still local year round. And a few things have crept back in for me, like the chocolate, some nuts, some white flour, some white sugar, some baking powder, and cinnamon, some of those things, the oil, the vinegar. But for the most part, it's still local. For my family, they indulge themselves a bit more than I do. So the Cheerios are back in the cupboard and bagels show up regularly.
So, I mean, the commitment is one amazing thing, but it's not just eating food, it's the processing, it's preparing, it's obtaining all of this food. I mean, where did you find your sense of proportion and normalcy with your involvement in this very demanding process and preparation?
Yes, well, for anyone who watches First We Eat, I think you'll probably come away with it thinking, well, there's absolutely no way anybody could do this unless you were, a little crazy and overly determined as I was. I think people will come away thinking, I could never do this because it just took so much time. How would I work? How would I have a life otherwise? But and it's on one hand, that was the reality for that year, but that was because I started out as a blank page. I mean, I started out as I mean, I don't know how much you garden or forage or do these things, Chuck, but I'm just going to make the assumption that maybe it's small. And so if you just said, okay, tomorrow someone's going to come in, clear out all your cupboards, and you have to eat local for a year, like it would take up every waking moment of your day to try and figure out how to do that. And that was my situation, because I started out not as a gardener, not as a forager, not as a cook, not really knowing anything, just this blank page. But I learned how to do things over that year, and I learned, where my food comes from. And so now I continue to eat local, as I've said, and yet I'm working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and it's not a big deal. It's really not a big deal. There's, a bit of extra time in the fall to process things, but on the flip side, I save a lot of time because I hardly ever have to go to the grocery store. All the ingredients are under my roof. And yeah, so that was another learning point for me, that you learn how to do things. These things are not rocket science. Once you have those skills and knowledge, then it doesn't actually take up a huge amount of time anymore.
So we've both made reference to this very important term of our time, sustainability. You've commented. Do you have any other thought you feel it's important to inject about sustainability?
Well, I mean, clearly this is fundamentally important. The sustainability of our planet is key to our sustainability as a species. And I think, what is interesting to me is this experiment was done and this film was made before the pandemic hit. I wondered when I made the film if anybody would be able to relate to it, or if people would say, oh, well, this is just a film for the far north of North America, where they're, far away from the breadbasket in the stores and whatnot. This doesn't make any sense for us. But of course, then the pandemic hit, and we all really became aware of how vulnerable we are, no matter where we live, because we rely so much on these long supply chains. And so, one of my take-home messages for sustainability and this pandemic, I think, has emphasized this, is just how important it is to be sustainable within our communities. And our communities have so much knowledge, so much ability to sustain us, whether it's urban or rural. Like, I mean, there's so many ways to produce food in urban environments too, even in huge cities like Shanghai and New York City. And I think, we just have learned in this pandemic that when push comes to shove, it's our own community that we have to rely on. And we've got lots of knowledge in our community. We have to work together, and we have to find ways that we can provide ourselves with the basics within our community. And then outside of that, like if we can have the shelter and the water and the heat and the companionship and the food within our community, then, the chocolate and the avocado and the banana and the coffee, if we have access to it, awesome, luxury. But we already know we have the staples. We already know we can survive within our communities. And I think that's really important.
This might be a good time to take a look at the trailer for the film. It's a good summary clip of the kind of things we've been talking about. So just let's take a couple-minute break and cue up the trailer for First We Eat.
How far are you going to take it? How the hell are you going to live without chocolate? Yeah, it's going to be tough.
You think Dad's going to do it for a year?
No.
You think Sam's going to do it for a year?
I can't really just, eat spinach.
I want salt and sugar.
I'm planning to spend an entire year eating only food that can be grown, gathered, hunted around Dawson.
Did you ever have any hope that any of us would actually agree to this?
Mom. Disgusting.
It's day 3, and I feel like crying. I'm not sure that I can do this alone.
When you're relying on the outside world to feed you, that's a pretty shaky concept, really.
Our ancestors survived thousands of years eating off the land. The land was the freezer. The land was the fridge.
Lots of fish. You just have to have faith. The trees will run and the leaves will come back.
Fresh honey in its honeycomb.
I want to know where every single ingredient on my plate comes from, and to know the people who helped put it there.
If you want to find nutrients, there are plenty of them around. All you need is determination.
So Suzanne, where does the title First We Eat come from? What does that lead phrase, First We Eat, mean?
There's a quote from MFK Fisher, who is an American woman, kind of a vanguard for her time, an author, and very much into the meaning of food in our lives. And she had a quote that's been popularized, I guess, go first we eat, then we do everything else. Just emphasizing, not so much like first we eat at the table, but how important food is for our survival. And then we can do everything else. I guess it could also be first we breathe, then we do everything else. And in this case, first we eat. So the title came from that that quote, and just as a reminder that how important food is for our survival and how important it is for us to understand where our food comes from and to value and to respect the people, the land, the animals that provide it for us. Because I think if we have that connection to our food and that understanding and that value and respect for those things, then we want to protect them. We want to protect the farmers. We want to protect the planet. We want to protect the ecosystem, the animals and the fish and the bees. So it does feel really fundamental to me to think about first we eat in a really broad sense.
So, we talk so much about the experiment, the adventure of it all, the food of it all, but how was it making the movie? What did it feel like to be the filmmaker?
Well, it was challenging, extra challenging because, as the film demonstrates, at that time anyway, it was kind of a 24/7 job to feed my family. So when in there do I get time to actually film the experience? So that was a challenge. It was also a challenge because I was the cinematographer, and I was also the cinematographer for All the Time in the World. In All the Time in the World, I show up on the other side of the camera less often than I do in First We Eat, because of course in First We Eat, this is my experiment. So I have to be seen quite a bit on camera. And it's challenging to be on both sides of the camera at once. It's challenging to set up a shot when you can't be in the shot to frame it properly. So this required kind of some extra creativity as a cinematographer, and even more time. Every shot took more time. So it was challenging, but on the flip side, the benefit of being the cinematographer, especially filming, such an intimate thing as a family going through a journey together, is that you're always there. And so the cameras, like our living room had several tripods and several cameras as part of the furniture all the time in our living space and kitchen and living room, so that at a moment's notice, I could turn on one and be ready to go. And I think that, again, that just allows, it allows one to capture moments that you can't capture if you're dependent on a film crew that can only show up on this Monday of the month, and whatever happens on that Monday is what you get. It also meant that the family ignores the camera because it's just part of the furniture. So everybody is just as they are. And it's not like, here comes the camera crew, so everybody gets a bit uptight and nervous or is on their best behavior. It's just, no, the cameras are part of it. So even though it is more challenging technically to film it, I think that the benefits outweigh those challenges and allows, in both films, allows me to capture things that would be really difficult to capture if a film crew was involved.
Well, I'm real glad that we've had quite a few references to your older film, All the Time in the World, as well as First We Eat. We're going to wrap up soon, but why don't we take another little side trip to a movie clip, this time for All the Time in the World, and get a feeling for why that is a desirable experience for people to pursue. Let's look at that.
Did you know a platypus is the only mammal who lays eggs?
Keep on going. I thought mammal meant that they don't lay eggs. And why doesn't Mom lay an egg to have us?
In the city, it feels like we're not really connected.
I always felt like there wasn't enough time for the things that really counted.
We packed up and headed 150 kilometers into the Yukon wilderness.
No running water, no electricity.
We had a lot of beans. Inside is our storage place, but outside is actually our home.
To get the freedom of time again, we had to free ourselves from the structure of time and see what would happen.
You know, we really didn't go in there with the intent that this will be our utopia forever. It was more of an opportunity for a reprieve. But there was also this bigger issue, which was the test of loneliness and the test of purpose and the test of cooperation.
Down the street, secret place.
You know, we thought, okay, 3 kids, small cabin, 9 months, no other kids. They're gonna drive each other crazy.
I want to roast marshmallow.
All the time.
And what we found was exactly the opposite.
All the time in the world. All the time in the world.
Yes, but a platypus is an exception. Just like there's a lot of exceptions in English. Think English is hard? Look at real life.
Cut it out, Sam.
Well, we're at the end of a wonderful conversation as far as I'm concerned, and I think people can get a great feeling for Suzanne, your vision and your commitment, and thank you so much for the films that you've made. I hope that people will get a chance to find the Reliant on Our Environment #1 session, a part of the festival. That would be for First We Eat, and the 20 years of WSFF adventure to find all the time in the world. But many times over, thank you very much for all you've had to offer here.
Thank you, Chuck, and big thanks to Wild and Scenic for bringing both films to the audience and bringing All the Time in the World back again. It's really been a great honor and pleasure to be part of the festival over the years. And I hope people, even though it's not an in-person event, I hope people will still be able to watch lots of films and the great insights and inspirations that all the films bring. So thank you so much, and thank you for this great conversation.
And I'll add a thank you to Circle, the South Yuba River Citizens League, for all the wonderful things they do, not the least being that we are in year 20 of the Wild and Scenic Film Festival. Thanks, of course, to all of you watching for plugging into the culture and the inspiration and the activism that all of this has with it. Bye-bye.